Okay, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about the class implications of the Me Too movement and various other, uh, you know, elements of what makes people politically active. So, I've seen class kind of influence the way people behave. I'd probably say, you know, there's always kind of this urge among some people to diminish how they had privileged upbringings because it makes it seem like they haven't accomplished that much. I personally, there were parts of my life where, we lived in a pretty good suburb. Never, my mom especially was never very well off. She used to work as a nurse, but I don't think she really cared whether we were upper class or lower class or whatever. She kind of was more about motivating, motivating you to be ambitious. And I think that's kind of the benefit of people who do have upper class lifestyles. I have a cousin who he did go to private school, sorry, for his entire education. Ended up playing in the orchestra and going to Harvard. Sorry, he went to Princeton. He didn't go to Harvard. Went to Princeton, and then now has a job for a massive corporation with great benefits. And I of course I'm sometimes envious of him, but he earned it the whole way. He really did work hard, whether it was with working on his um, you know playing the music for the orchestra or on his schoolwork. He was probably the complete opposite of me in almost every way respect that you could conjure up. So this person, you know, never became very politically active because the focus was never on making his class palatable to people of other classes, other social classes. It was kind of just him being comfortable in his skin. So far as I know, I've never heard him make some sort of bizarre social commentary. Now his sister is a bit of a different matter, but still not to the degree of some of these real freaks that you kind of see that are obsessed with their social class. And how does that affect the Me Too movement? Well, there was, of course, the Lena Dunham rape hoax, which is very reminiscent, very, very reminiscent of what actually happened. Let me see here. What's been happening with Brett Kavanaugh? You see, Lena Dunham at one point published in her autobiography, Not That Kind of Girl, this very hazy account of a sexual encounter with what she called a Republican named Barry when she went to the University Oberlin College, which is over, a few counties over from where I live. Well, one county over, but it's to the west. And basically she was never able to verify her story because the intent of the story was never to actually depict an event that could be corroborated. It was in order to make Dunham's biography into something that seemed a little more courageous than somebody who'd grown up with a very well put together family. I believe she grew up in, it might have been North Carolina. Let me see here. I'm not sure. Maybe it was just New York City. So yeah, she was from Brooklyn, and she went to St. Anne's School, which is a prep school in Brooklyn, and then she goes to Oberlin College, which is Oberlin College. For those of you that don't know, is very expensive, very, very expensive, and so Lena Dunham, like a lot of other people who have become part of the upper crust of the liberal progressive social sphere does not come from humble backgrounds. Okay, there are a number of people who probably would, and I don't know off the top of my head. I don't think that really matters. There are a number of people I think that would be members of this social sphere that could say, well, yeah, I did work hard to get to where I am. Can't necessarily think of them at the moment, but she's not one of them. And a lot of the people who are at the top are not that way. And I can think of a number of people. For example, Keith Olbermann. I think he went to some sort of really stuffy prep school in maybe it was upstate New York or Westchester County. You can just look it up. I mean, you can just pick a person. See, he went to, yeah, he lived in Hastings on the Hudson in Westchester County and attended Hackley School in nearby Tarrytown. And yeah, he went to Cornell. And it's not to say, Keith Olbermann, we can make fun of him, and he really is a ridiculous human being. But the guy did reach the apex of ESPN because he had a personality that was very magnetic at the time. This was the early 90s. Now, he squandered a lot of that through, some of his later activities. And I think that if we're being honest with ourselves, a lot of these people who came from very, good households that did sustain their children, that did give them the means to succeed, those people, due to then the political environment of this country, way before our current saga, started to see within themselves this guilt at basically being born into this charmed life. And I think it is kind of wrong. Tucker Carlson, I think is kind. I used to think of him as a clown, and he kind of fits the exact same mold, but he doesn't have that guilt complex that these other weirdos have. And I think that you don't have to really trust Tucker Carlson on everything, but ultimately, class wouldn't matter if people really believed in principles, if they would commit themselves to certain things. I don't think that class has to matter. And why is this kind of being shoved into the limelight right now? Well, we're talking about allegations made against Brett Kavanaugh when he was attending, I think it was Georgetown Prep and whatever. And you know what? I grew up. We did resent those are the people that I hung out with. We did resent kind of the prep school crowd. We saw them, those of us that I did hang out with. We saw people who were part of that crowd as kind of above us, especially. And then even people who went to AP classes in public school, we kind of saw as overachievers, people who thought that they were too. There was kind of this failure failure complex that we had, and I did take a couple AP courses, but there was never really a commitment to excellence, so to speak. And that's really the problem of people who don't necessarily get the right motivation early. I don't think it's because of my parents, but the social pressure to kind of conform to the way other people are behaving, that sort of drives people who are not part of the upper class. And then you get into the upper class, there is a culture of excellence, at least in these institutions, whether it is Georgetown Prep or, what's another school, Groton or Phillips Academy, or, some of these schools are famous beyond New England. So I would say that the culture that Brett Kavanaugh was raised in, it would produce a number of different things. Now, it could produce, of course, the wild party boy type of lifestyle that people are portraying him as in these allegations. Let's not beat around the bush. There are people who go to prep schools who behave that way, and we shouldn't just behave as if it doesn't happen. It also creates a lot of people who are very high functioning, who are motivated, who are connected, which is part of the bargain. You don't have to like it, but that's part of the reason people send their kids to prep school, in order to get those connections, in order to be successful. That's the way you network. You network early, and you network with the right people, and your kid might become one of the more successful ones in the country. I'm not saying that you have to think it's fair. I'm just saying it makes sense. And I would say with Brett Kavanaugh, there's plenty of evidence already that he went through that type of life, the type of person who networks successfully, and meets the right people. Yeah, the guy made it to the federal bench. Most people who go for law degrees don't have that. And, I'm not trying to kiss his ass, but there are a lot of people who say, well, this is exactly the type of person we want on the federal bench. Now, of course, there are these new allegations that kind of paint him in a totally different light, as some sort of lewd character or something. And that type of thing also happens in prep schools. And this this person, Alexandra Lascase, is trying to make it seem like, well, this is kind of typical of this. He says, I wish I were surprised. A week ago, Sunday, when Ford first shed her anonymity, detailing her sexual assault allegation against Kavanaugh to the Washington Post, I wrote a note in the Facebook alumni group of my school, National Cathedral School, different school. I told my 1988 classmates, okay, different time, that Ford story was bringing back disturbing high school memories of yours. Apparently, I was not alone. A lot of women now in their 40s and 50s who went to these single-sex DC prep schools in the 1980s have been reaching out to each other in fraught emails and chats over the past week. Not only did the Holton Arms alumni start a petition in support of Ford, their fellow alum, there's also one for anyone to sign who survived that toxic time and place. I don't personally know Ford now, and I didn't know her in high school. But as the Holton women wrote, what Ford is alleging is all too consistent with what we heard and lived while attending Holton. Many of us are survivors ourselves. So I want to say this, okay? Those people who went to those privileged schools, and who they were the daughters of very prominent families, if they are alleging that they could not come forward and expose these deviant dudes, then in reality, their privilege doesn't mean shit. And that's really what they're aiming to do. They're trying to say, well, people, the daughters of prominent citizens like them, they couldn't seek justice. They had nobody to turn to, or there was a culture of silence or something. And it might well be true, but if that is the case, then really we're not talking like, if these people would have alleged sexual assault against some of these men, we don't know what would have happened. Okay, it could be that they would have been laughed off. Let's not let's not rule that out. But the fact of the matter is that they're trying to make it seem like they were, you know, just complete victims, these powerless instruments of a system that's way beyond their control. That's not really the way that partying high schoolers behave. People want to go. People want to go to these parties. I remember going to our parties were pretty shitty, but everybody wanted to go get wrecked at a party somewhere. Even some people had this obsession with just getting the booze and not even having the party. You would just buy. You'd find a person who would buy you the booze. That's the way it was. So it says, I don't personally know for now. Da 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 da. And what Elizabeth Razor alleges Mark Judge told her is not foreign to me either. Whether and how the nation comes to hear more about these specific stories, they have evoked a collective scream. A large part of my high school experience were the parties at Kavanaugh's houses with multiple bedrooms, huge dark basements with enormous sofas and yards, and lots of beer. No parents, thinking back on it now as a parent myself, were ever around. That's kind of the idea, stupid. We traveled in groups and knew never to leave a friend alone at a party, but there was so much drinking that we sometimes lost track of each other. It could be difficult to know where your friends were and if they were in a room with a boy, what was going on there. Every June we had Beach Week, a tradition also described in a Washington Post piece by Ford, in which teenagers actually rent houses to party at the beach, something I still don't quite comprehend. What's so hard to understand? Okay, I, I I distinctly remember being at a beach week party with my then boyfriend when it dawned on us that there was a drunk girl in the room down the hall, and boys were lining up to go in there and presumably have their way with her. We didn't know for sure, but my boyfriend and my friend's boyfriend went. So this is kind of I think they were running a train on her. All I remember about her is that she was in the class above us and had dark hair. My friend has told me she remembers boys saying "I'm next," which was what that was the only time I can clearly remember a situation that was so obviously a lineup as it was referred to by some at the school. My friend remembers witnessing another, and though there weren't, so it doesn't say whether this person was incapacitated. So we don't know. We don't know. So a lot of these there are women. Okay, I just want to put it out there. There are women who participate in gangbangs. There just are. It was not always so formal a cue. I remember around another time when boys were sitting in kind of a campfire circle that could have started as a game of spin the bottle, but by the time I walked around through the room, there was a girl who was drunken in the center of the circle, and the boys were taking turns putting their hands up her skirt instead of kissing her. For these girls who were assaulted, it felt so. Again, we don't know consent. We don't know exactly who these people are. There's no context here. This is a woman who she would go to these parties. They liked going to these parties. If they didn't like going to these parties, they should have probably made a decision at the time. And if and by the way, okay, I want to say this. There probably are a fair amount of girls who go to these parties due to peer pressure or whatever. Now, a lot of the times back in maybe like a year ago, not even, there was this call to refrain from slut shaming and drunk shaming these women who would be get into these situations, compromise situations. Well, I'm sorry, nobody forces you to go to a party. Even if your friends can convince you to go there, there's still the element of personal decision there. Okay. And like I said, okay, and anybody can, if you want to read this article and say you feel differently, feel free to, comment below or let me know what you think. But I believe it's this issue. Okay, these were people that they had the best situation in life that their parents could provide, and they were sent to schools that would give them the best start in life that they could hope for. And this one aspect of that lifestyle was one thing that nowadays they look at as their ticket to saying, well, no, in reality, we weren't that well off. In reality, we were living in kind of our own our own hell on earth. And I don't really believe that's accurate. If it was really accurate, you would never have really stayed together with, you would probably have ran away from all the other people that had gone to those schools and kind of hidden away from it and not participated in alumni events or stuff like that, or you would have only talked to people that were former victims like yourselves. And I don't believe that that's the case. I don't believe that that is really what's happening at those schools. And if it was, I think that you would have much more of a pattern of scandals the way that we're seeing right now in the Catholic Church. Um, that's not to say this. It's not to say that these guys that might actually be, uh, taking advantage of women without their consent in high school. It doesn't mean that that's an okay thing. It doesn't mean that you can just do whatever the hell you want because the Me Too movement has gone too far. People have to have limits. They have to remember that if you are not in control of your own actions due to being intoxicated, then the law still applies. There's nothing you can do about that. That's the best way to look at these types of situations. Try to be in a state of mind where you can control your actions and avoid being taken advantage of to the best of your ability. And in light of what's going on tomorrow and all the crap of the past 24 hours, which I don't think that there's a point getting into specifics right now because I can't keep track of it all. There's one accuser that wouldn't come to court, and there's another accuser with an affidavit, and this one is saying gangbang, and then now there's two witnesses that say, well, it wasn't Kavanaugh, it was us. Let's remember that like a couple weeks ago, this was all about friggin' court briefs and stuff like that, stuff that nobody cared about. Now it's about all sorts of crazy shit. So the judicial process has been very debased, and we don't know what the hell is going to happen soon. So I think that you have to focus on the things that can be actually really analyzed and assessed. And I think the class issue of this whole saga is something important. And I think that there's plenty of people that could probably say that, yes, I went to these parties. Yes, they were a bit creepy, but I did it as my own choice, and I can't change things that happened back in 1982 or 1975 or whenever they were. Anyway, if you have an opinion on this, please put it in the comments below. Like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the Live Wounds channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds, which has live streams, and I'll talk to you guys later. Have a happy Thursday.